People who grew up in dictatorships, what was that experience like? My mother grew up in Spain during Franco's regime. It was, according to her, very chauvinistic and traditional to the point of insanity. Fortunately for them, my grandfather was in the steel industry, which was badly needed after the Spanish Civil War, so the family was better off than most because of it. Things got weird in the 60s and 70s as Franco got old and demented, and the now king was partying with separatists/Democrats. Basically, he was denying it the whole time as the country slowly caught up with everyone else in tech and culture.
It's interesting to hear about how life was back then. Your mom's perspective on the regime gives a real insight into how tough things were. It's good to know your family had some stability with your grandfather's work. The clash of old traditions with modern changes must have created a unique environment. It's fascinating how history shapes people's lives, and your mom's experiences must be a big part of who she is today.
Nigerian here. Grew up during the days of General Abacha. My parents are professors and were not paid for 18 months. Most professors in the university had to take up farming so as to feed their families. I can remember trekking to the farm every weekend with the whole family to go get some food. I know it is not as bad as other countries that experience dictatorship, but it was pretty terrible then.
That sounds like a tough time. It's hard to imagine how difficult it was for your parents and many others. Having to adapt like that, taking up farming just to get by, shows a lot of resilience. Trekking to the farm with the family must have been challenging, but also a bonding experience. It's true that everyone's struggles are different, but it shapes who we are in the end.
Ex-communist republic. Was 10 years old when the regime crashed down. My father was military. Even 3 to 4 years after the regime change, he clinged on to what he knew were truths. Only when he went abroad and saw the prosperity, meaning supermarkets with a lot of groceries, he kind of realized that everything he had ever known was false. The indoctrination is very difficult to address, though. You have to intellectually challenge every notion you have concerning not every politics, but every aspect of life.
That's an interesting story. It must have been tough for your dad to reconcile his beliefs after seeing a different reality. It's not easy to let go of things you've been taught for so long. The way indoctrination shapes our views is complex. It takes a lot of effort to challenge what you think, especially about fundamental aspects of life. It's a journey that many people struggle with, even later in life.
I visited Honduras this summer for some ecological studies in Cusco National Park. We spent a total of 2 nights in San Pedro Sula, and we were terrified. One night at around 11, we saw someone walking down the street get kidnapped by armed thugs in a nondescript van. About every minute or so, a truck, either pickup or military truck, would go down the street with people both in and out of uniform in the back with M16s and AK-47s. Armed guards on every street corner. That place was sketchy everywhere. We felt much safer in the jungle.
That sounds intense. Seeing a kidnapping firsthand would be nerve-wracking. It's wild how a city can feel so unsafe, yet being in the jungle brings a different kind of peace, even if it's just nature. It's interesting how our perceptions of safety can shift based on our surroundings. I guess you really appreciate the quiet and calm after experiencing that kind of chaos. Makes you think about where you choose to be.
People who were born in Western countries, UK, USA, Australia, Canada, Germany, etc. You should be grateful for the freedoms that you have and that you have governments which are accountable and democratic and allow people to have freedoms, which people sometimes take for granted. Of course, your governments aren't perfect. Thank you for the reminder. I have lived all my life in the USA, and we constantly grumble about the imperfections in our democracy. It is always refreshing to be reminded that every country on earth is imperfect, and among them my country is one of the best.
It's easy to focus on the negatives when you live in a place with so many freedoms. I remember having a conversation with a friend who traveled a lot. They told me how grateful they were for the basic rights we often overlook. It really put things in perspective. Sometimes, we need that reminder to appreciate what we have, even if it's not perfect. It's all about perspective, I guess.
Elaine, fellow Syrian. I agree with what you said, but I grew up in Aleppo, went to an international school, and honestly I had an awesome childhood and upbringing. Never felt oppressed or threatened in any way. It was a safe place to grow up, and I miss it so much. Of course, this is all due to the fact that no one in my family talked politics, and we had enough to bribe to get what we wanted. I understand, of course, that this was not the norm, and that millions of Syrians that had family members disappear, and that the Mukhabarat secret police is and was a major issue. What is happening now is heartbreaking, but it was inevitable.
It's interesting how experiences can differ so much within the same country. Growing up in Aleppo with a fairly normal childhood sounds like a rare situation, especially given the broader context. It's good that your family managed to keep politics at bay, allowing you to enjoy your upbringing. But it's also a stark reminder that many others faced really tough realities. Those memories of childhood can stick with you, even when times change.
Yeah, the casual racism is appalling there. I spent the formative years of my career in the UAE. For me, it was paradise, but that was because I was a professional in white. My professional but Indian friends had it far worse. That said, I would definitely go back, because tax-free USD salaries are dope.
It's interesting how experiences can differ based on background. It sounds like you had a good run there, but it's a reminder that not everyone enjoys the same advantages. The tax-free salaries are great, but those social dynamics can be tough to navigate. It's cool that you would consider going back, though. Makes you think about the trade-offs we all have to make in our careers.
What part of the country did you grow up in? My dad grew up in Bistritsa. He had 6 to 8 weeks of school, Sunday being his only day off. He had to work in the fields almost every day after school, though. As for the army, you were sent after you either graduated school or failed the grade you were in. Dad failed 11th grade and left the country in 1986 before his draft date. It's interesting to see the great and popular dictator couldn't even hold consistency in his own country.
It's pretty wild how different things were back then. Your dad had a tough schedule, with school and farm work. Failing a grade leading to leaving the country shows how high the stakes were. It's kind of ironic that even the strong leaders couldn't keep everyone in line. Those stories give a glimpse into a time that's hard to imagine now. Makes you appreciate what you have today.
Once I spoke with old grandpa from Poland in Zurich Hostel. This was like 70 years old, and he told me how, when he was young, he crossed border secretly few times. It was forbidden to do. He did it just to travel around Europe. He was hitchhiking around Switzerland, etc. Then I realized I never knew that Poland was under communist rule, and I live in nearby Ukraine. I should know that. How come I do not know? I don't like to read history books, and do not remember from school program too. In time of Ukraine Maidan, I found out about the Polish movement Solidarity. Is there any good English language source about it? I have to say, for me, our movement Maidan was an eye-opening experience on many things in life. I had experience living and traveling abroad, but I had no idea how deeply world different around us.
It's interesting how you can learn so much from someone's life experience. Meeting that grandpa must have put a lot into perspective. It's easy to overlook history, especially when you're caught up in your own life. The connection between Poland and Ukraine adds another layer too. I get what you mean about Maidan being eye-opening. Sometimes, real-life events hit harder than anything from books. You might check out some documentaries or podcasts on solidarity.
I grew up in Romania during communism, in a city 50 kilometers away from the border with Yugoslavia, what today is Serbia, and I remember Yugoslavia being considered heaven compared to Romania. My parents would watch only Serbian TV channels, would cross the border, probably illegally, to buy stuff from there, and would tell stories about how awesome Serbia was.
That's an interesting perspective. Growing up in a different country under communism must have shaped a lot of views. It's funny how people look to neighboring countries for what they lack. Your parents clearly found a way to connect with something they thought was better. It's a testament to the allure of the outside world, especially when you're stuck in a tough situation. Makes you realize how much environments can influence our perceptions.
Sort of. If you had the money, you could get out. With my uncle's help, we had the money. They still made it a pain to leave, even though they effectively wanted us to leave. I don't remember very well, but I believe that my dad was being called in almost weekly right up until we packed our bags and left. We didn't quite get smuggled out, but it wasn't 100% legal either. Basically, if you manage to get to the border and bribe them enough, they let you through. If they catch you beforehand, you're fucked. At the border, they took my grandmother's nice blankets and some of my aunt's jewelry. They didn't allow my dad to take more than one floppy disk worth of his personal programs and drivers that he wrote for DOS, citing national security. For the most part, we made it out okay. This was about 17 years ago now. I don't remember the details exactly, but that's the gist of it.
It's interesting how life can push you into situations like that. Leaving everything behind, but somehow you manage to get out. The warnings, the bribes, and losing personal stuff at the border. It makes you realize what's important, and what you can live without. It's a strange memory, but it shapes who you are. It's good to hear you made it out mostly okay.
No, not really. Thanks to anti-communist propaganda. We hated communists in the 80s. We hated so hardo in the late 90s. We actually liked Dutch. A lot of us have unreasonable attachment with the Dutch, especially the younger generations. We love your football team, people in Molucca region with most attachment to Dutch, because a lot of them migrated there, partied like crazy when you guys beat Spain in 2014 World Cup. So there's that. Edit. Spelling.
It's interesting how history shapes feelings. I've seen the same thing happen with my friends and their attachments to different cultures. One of my friends is obsessed with Italy because of family roots. Whenever Italy plays in football, it's like a festival at his place. It's a mix of nostalgia and pride that seems to connect generations, even if it doesn't always make sense. People find joy in unexpected places.
Canadians often travel to Cuba. Compared to other Caribbean destinations, Cuba has the advantage to offer nearly no crime against tourists compared to the Dominican Republic or Mexico. The prices are also very good, and the Cubans are mostly seen as genuinely friendly. The only downside is that the food is considered bad compared to other destinations. But at least the Cubans are not starving.
I've heard a bunch of Canadians are heading to Cuba lately. They say it's pretty safe for tourists, which is a plus. The prices seem decent too. Sure, the food might not be the best, but it's all about the experience, right? Plus, I guess hanging out with friendly locals makes up for it. Seems like a chill place to relax if you're not too picky about meals.
That is actually really surprising. Apparently, Slovenia has been on a steady path of increasing growth, and it rates highly in developing towards a much stronger economy. In fact, I stay in touch with my distant cousins. My great-grandmother is their great-grandmother's sister, and they have all mentioned that the world is much better. As one of them said, I used to only have a bare amount that could barely be called living, and today, I have been able to work very hard to open a factory. Basically a plastics manufacturing plant with like 6 to 20 employees, and enjoy the fruit of my labor. His sons have been able to pursue photography, engineering, and more all just because education is free to all residents through college.
That's pretty interesting. It's great to hear about your cousin's success and how the economy is improving. That factory sounds like a solid opportunity for them, especially with their hard work paying off. Free education really opens doors, letting people follow their passions without the financial burden. It's always nice to see family thriving and making the most of what they have.
Libya's old flag always amused me. I'm a bit of a heraldry and vexillology nerd, and one of the ideas of these is that you can describe the image with specific language based off Old French called a blazon. Libya's old flag could be blazoned with one word, vert. The only way it could be shorter is as it was a plain yellow flag, which would be or.
I get that. Flags can be interesting in their simplicity. Libya's old flag being just vert really shows how minimalism can make a statement. It's funny how something so basic can still carry a lot of history. I remember when I first learned about vexillology, it opened my eyes to a lot of cultural nuances and symbols. You don't really grasp the details until you start looking deeper.
Apparently Ceausescu didn't even set up or train a riot squad. He was so delusional that he honestly believed his people loved him. There would never be any unrest, and therefore why bother? This was one of the reasons why protests against his regime took hold so quickly, aside from the army, who eventually noped out. He had no way of dealing with it. Even North Korea has a riot squad on permanent standby, and they have actually been used. I heard about a British-style football riot in Pyongyang, and normal North Koreans trashed a stadium.
It's wild how some leaders really believe they're untouchable. Ceausescu thought the support was solid, but he was completely out of touch. Not having a plan for dissent is a huge miscalculation. You'd think after seeing other regimes he'd prepare for backlash. North Korea at least has a grip on that chaos, even if it's pretty bleak. Just goes to show how delusions can pave the way for a swift downfall.
I had a Zimbabwean white acquaintance. What he told me was that he got kicked out without a passport. He loved the place he grew up. It was the place his parents and grandparents grew up. He did not have any ties to any other countries, no relatives or friends. He ended up being in South Africa, which was apparently the only country that let him in.
That's a tough situation. It's wild how people can lose everything in a hurry. This guy found himself in a completely foreign environment, probably feeling lost and alone. South Africa might have been a new start, but it had to be hard adjusting after being uprooted. It's a reminder that life can change in an instant, and some people have to rebuild from scratch, with no safety net.
You are welcome here any time of the year. I'm curious to know, why did you need to travel 4 hours by bus? My guess would be that you either did go to visit the ruins of the Roman civilizations or the desert. I guess what you were calling ruins are actually poorly maintained houses. Tunisia is not even close to being one of the richest countries in the continent. It's only natural that there are poor people not even able to build a house legally. It would make more sense if you did go far from the coast. Those are the regions that didn't get the same attention as coastal cities. I'm able to give more explanations if you tell me where did you go, and I'm sorry for your mother's disappointment.
Traveling isn't always about the destination. One time, I took a long bus ride to visit an ancient site, thinking it would be amazing. Turned out, the place was just a rundown area, barely resembling what I'd seen in pictures. It was a letdown, sure. But I met some locals who shared their stories, which was more interesting than the ruins. Sometimes those moments matter more than the place itself.
I live in the US and have a chronic health condition. Through support groups, I have connected with others around the world with the same condition. None of them have the access to as up-to-date of testing or as many specialists, if any, who are knowledgeable on their specific condition like I do. If they do, and their national health program doesn't deem it necessary, they see the expert/get the tests, then they either have to go private or not get the testing/consultation. Their wait times for healthcare are also quite long compared to what I experienced due to them prioritizing patients, which I understand. With how many doctors I have to see, I'm happy everything doesn't take as long here as it does other places. The US system needs quite a bit of work, but thanks to all of the research done here, I wouldn't prefer to be living in any other country with a poorly understood chronic illness.
It's interesting how healthcare varies from place to place. Connecting with people who have the same condition must be helpful. It's good that you have access to better testing and specialists compared to others. The wait times can really affect things, and while the US healthcare system has flaws, it sounds like it provides some advantages for your situation. It's a bit of a mixed bag for sure.
Unless I get a full scholarship, I won't be able to go to college. My parents aren't willing to put in a cent. I would normally be able to get that kind of scholarship, but I would need therapy for my many issues. They refuse to get me help and think I am exaggerating or faking my illnesses to get sent home from school and to get sympathy.
That sounds really tough. It must be hard to feel unsupported when you're dealing with so much. Trying to navigate all that stress while wanting a better future can feel overwhelming. Knowing you need help but not getting it adds another layer. I hope you can find a way to get the support you need, whether it's through someone else or on your own. Just keep pushing forward.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.